This session is on biases in news. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the difference between journalists and commentators. Both can be part of news organizations, but they do have some key differences. Journalists and reputable news organizations for which they work should work under the following guidelines. They should abide by processes in place to promote accurate news and also to correct errors in their news, and they should do that quickly and transparently. They should also disclose conflicts of interests, either personal or with their organization in general. News organizations should hire reporters that have both education and expertise in the field of journalism. In addition, they should engage in ongoing training and they should have review over their work. There should be no political agenda, either at the individual or organizational level when reporting. Here on this slide, we can see a couple of journalists, one being Walter Cronkite, who was a very well-respected journalist of the 20th century. And then we also see Kristen Welker of NBC News, who has reported at the White House for many years and holds a very positive reputation. There is a difference between journalism and commentary. And we also see on this screen a person named Tucker Carlson, who often is on the news, but gives more opinion. And so it's all part of news organizations, but we really want to keep those separate and to be able to discern between them. So a columnist or a commentator or someone providing opinion is intentionally expressing a viewpoint. And that's fine, but that content should be clearly labeled as such. If they are relying on facts provided as part of their commentary, they still should be fact-checked and accurate. There are lots of blurred lines in this area, and it's why the news literacy frameworks are so valuable, and healthy skepticism should always be applied. Next, we're going to talk about different bias in the news. Now, we all have bias because it's quite simply just how people see things. So we all have bias, and that's fine. It's good, though, to recognize it so that you can counteract bias when you're thinking about the validity of news stories. One of the most common types of bias is confirmation bias. And by that, I mean the tendency to quickly embrace information that affirms our perspectives and beliefs, and to sometimes unfairly dismiss or criticize information that complicates or contradicts those beliefs that we hold. News coverage that is biased towards someone's beliefs or opinions often just feels right to that person, which may help explain the popularity of openly partisan news sources. And it's also why it's good to review a variety of news sources, including those that you think might go against your confirmation bias. Next is partisan bias. It's a type of bias in which a journalist's own personal political views affect the way they cover the news. Corporate bias, a type of bias in which a business or the advertising interest of a news outlet or perhaps even its parent company influence how or even whether a story is covered. News organizations make most of their revenue from ads, and so this can be very pervasive within the news. There's a couple of other additional types of bias, and these biases are presented to us with the help of the News Literacy Project. The next one is demographic bias, and that's a type of bias in which race, gender, ethnicity, culture, or economic class affect news coverage. So all of the things that provide our identity certainly have an impact on us and can create bias in the way we consume news or the way that news is presented. Big story bias. This is a type of bias in which journalists' perceptions of an event or development as a major important story can cause them to miss key details. This can happen when they're trying to get a scoop, and we have to be very cautious when this is occurring. There's also neutrality bias, and this is a type of bias in which a journalist or a news outlet tries so hard to avoid appearing biased that the coverage actually misrepresents the facts. Should never downplay actual facts. Don't bend over backward to show the opposing viewpoint if it's not relevant in the moment. So make sure that the facts always come first and are highlighted. Now, bias comes through in different forms in journalism. So these two are things that you can look out for when you're consuming news. One is, how is the framing of the story? How is it approached by the journalist? How is it organized and presented? Next is story selection. Think about this. Which stories are covered? Who's deciding this? They don't just magically appear. A journalist has to decide which stories to cover, how many minutes to, or how many words to provide in terms of what's happening with that story. So keep that in mind. Is there an absence of balance? Is there a presenting of one side when there clearly is another side to this story? Has there been any attempt to get a response from the side that perhaps isn't being presented in great depth? That should be revealed. Flawed sourcing can be an issue. Not getting a thorough representation or viewpoint. Sometimes we see a journalist relying sort of a man on the street report versus going to a more official source or having to dig deeper. There should be transparency as to whether an effort was made and to whom to get these additional viewpoints. And then lastly, tone. Is the news presented in a calm, methodical manner, or are emotional words and expressions used when reporting? Again, these are things to all look out for. Lastly, in this tutorial, we'll talk about the special considerations for breaking news. When big news breaks, it can be hard to cut through the noise and find accurate information. We all want information quickly, but this is when we should be most disciplined about considering content through a news literacy lens. First, mind the gap. Keep in mind there is often a gap between what we, the public, want to know and the verified information available at any one time. Beware of bad actors. Remember, bad actors can capitalize on this uncertainty and chaos and lack of immediate information by spreading falsehoods. This can help them gain attention, or in social media, help them to gain followers. But when there is chaos, be extra careful in consuming the news. Do a quick search, Google it. This is often your best defense against misinformation. Seek out additional known credible sources and see if different news outlets are saying roughly the same thing. Look for evidence. Are there bold assertions in the news story that provide no links or other evidence? Always approach with caution when no evidence or little evidence is presented. And lastly, practice patience. Quality journalism and verification take time. So please be ready to follow news developments over time when following a news story.